They let me pick. Did I ever tell you that? Choose whichever Spartan I wanted. You know me. I did my research, watched as you became the soldier we needed you to be. Like the others, you were strong and swift and brave. A natural leader. But you had something they didn't. Something no one saw but me. Can you guess? Luck. Was I wrong?
Jumbled grass, familiar turns. Those who built this place knew what they wrought.
Halo Infinite is the latest mainline installment to the Halo video game franchise. It has come to us 6 years after the last main installment, which had most fans feeling like the new developers, 343 Industries, missed the point of its story and thus lost the spirit of the original Halo games. For most, including myself, Halo's campaign was an introduction to concepts like giant ring worlds, alien zombies, and lying leaders losing their grasp on power. Halo was at its best in the original trilogy. Saying that should not be controversial. The first 3 games were what created the fan base and set the standard with which all future titles had to try and live up to. And the most interesting thing about that, in my mind, is how Bungie went about making their stories. They did the very same thing that 343 had done, just with more liberty. 343 was tasked/obligated with emulating past Halo games, something they seemed not wanting to do. Bungie, on the other hand, used other science fiction concepts and storylines to create their vision, without the restraint of expectations. And now, it seems, with Halo Infinite, 343 has taken that expectation approach fans have wanted all along, while also continuing to craft their original, different storyline. Before going on, may I just say, hello everybody, and welcome back to another thought piece by me, ya boy, Joe Van. Today's subject is, well, pretty specific. A single game. I've never done a thought piece on such a specific subject, so I want to take a different approach other than just giving a simple review. You know, mix things up a little. To start with that, I want to dive into how Bungie borrowed themes and ideas from elsewhere and shook them all up to create their own story. The first Halo game did this the heaviest. Its opening roll call was ripped straight out of James Cameron's Aliens. The concept of a ring world itself was taken from the Ring World novels by Larry Niven, published in the 1970s. And other written influences include Ender's Game, The Vang, and Armor. For some people, this is nothing new. Fun facts, tidbits of their favorite franchise, and to all of you literary cultured academics, good for you! But to me, I didn't learn about these influences until recently, like even the Ring World books. I saw the movie Elysium and thought to myself, hey, that's Halo! My boy Blomkamp ripped off those movies you couldn't get enough money for. Now I know better. Side note, but isn't it crazy how business comes before art in cinema? The whole thing's a business parading as an art form. But anyway, I did know about the Aliens ripoff because I saw that firsthand. Then when Avatar came out and there were names for things like Banshees for the aircraft, I was like, oh, this is James Cameron hitting back at Bungie for taking his things. Back on point, further huge influences were such works as the Bible and other historical texts. Spartans, elites, brutes, jackals, arbiters, ghosts, and banshees, all these terms come from Abrahamic/Roman times. Tales back then were spun with the same names used. I bring all this up not to point out some kind of unoriginality taking place in all the Bungie games, but rather how the game's stories were at their strongest when they used outside sources to bolster the tale they wanted to tell. Halo, even that word, taken from another meaning. So what about 343's Halos? Well, they aren't entirely going for their own thing either. Those games are based heavily off of literary material too, only instead of it being outside sources, they're based off their own books series. Now, in saying that accusatorily, several extremely talented novelists have made Halo books over the years. Eric Nyland, Joseph Staten, and Greg Bear are my personal favorites. The stories they've created are easily worthy of film adaptations in my opinion, though only if it were done right, of course, which would never happen because execs would only greenlight it if it was injected with basic dialogue and topical comedy and other stuff like that would alienate both the casual viewer and a fan, but I get away from myself. Halo as a universe is a vast and rich pool of story potential. There's so many different factions and histories and mysteries and perspectives. It makes for great reading. However, when then taking story inspirations from said foundation of novels, you gotta be careful to properly adapt. There are examples of successful novel-to-game adaptations such as The Witcher and Metro, which show that such a feat is possible, but in this case, you have a weird game-to-novel-to-game switcheroo thingamajig going on. It could have led to an easy pull, but did it stick the landing? It's up to each individual person. I can't tell you that, but what I can tell you is that the popularity of Halo unfortunately began to see a decline after Halo Reach. Is it the author's faults for this? No, it's just bad implementation. Again, in my opinion, many can and have said these newer Halo games are better than the original, so all this talk is just my perspective. But from my perspective, I feel like there was no one thing 343 did to lose Halo's status of greatness. My theory is people hearing Bungie leaving played a role in viewer concern, and then having a multiplayer desperate to be like other shooters did them in. Campaign-wise, my biggest gripe were the Prometheans. They were not fun to battle against. I missed the scarabs, warthog runs, and sheer stakes involved in the OG campaigns. These new games felt unnecessary. After defeating the Didact, then facing a new evil Cortana, Halo Infinite found itself at a tough starting point. It was the third part to a story, but one that felt like just a part 2 to Halo 5. This trilogy 343 made felt far more disjointed than Bungie's trilogy. Where would this final act in their trilogy lead us? Well, some, including myself, theorized it would finalize the Chief's story, having him die or retire. Others speculated Halo Infinite would see the Flood return by Cortana's hand and force the Banished in the UNSC to work together against Prometheans to stop the Flood. Where the story did end up going was definitely unpredictable, but also incomplete. 343 made a concerted effort to bring back what people loved about the Bungie games. They did so in a way that didn't take away from what they added, but steered the boat to find that nostalgia fans, like myself, were so desperate for. The art style was the biggest overhaul, and one half of their greatest achievement in my mind. The other half was the gameplay style. Halo now looks and feels like Halo again. Rejoice! They kept mechanics like clamber, sprint, zoom for all guns, and slide, but did so in a way that didn't take away from the core sandbox mechanics. Equipments were reinstalled, back from the Halo 3 days, and Chief no longer received fall damage. Ripped to his knees, but thank the Forerunners for it. All of this in one word is freedom. But now, where did the story go? That's the biggest impact for me. A game can have the world's funnest mechanics, but if the story is doo-doo, that's what I'll remember the most. An Infinite story, by comparison to Halo 5, is absolutely amazing! It's a palate cleanser, it's a return to basics. It does its best and damnedest to reinvigorate the main story thread, and it did so superbly. However, it is far from perfect. Infinite Story served to achieve several goals, and in doing so didn't have the same kind of freedom the gameplay had. It wasn't able to spread its wings and soar. The biggest blunder is that it is unfinished, though talk of story DLCs should mean that that feeling will not be infinite. Its story is hyper-focused on the Chief, waving goodbye to the plethora of characters introduced in Halo 4 and 5. If 343 wanted, they could have had a soul-crushing campaign where you start off fighting alongside all the characters you've come to know and love, but against overwhelming odds, and level by level You witness each and every beloved character die off, until only you, the chief, stand as the last chance to stop Cortana. It would be brutal and leave the story truly at an end, but work at giving weight to and concluding this new galactic threat known as Cortana once and for all. But I can see why they didn't go for that. Instead, the campaign serves us a message of hope against dire odds, and those dire odds are simply the Banished. I appreciate from a gameplay perspective their focus and use of the aliens we know and love to kill as the main enemies. It was the right move to switch away from using Prometheans, but the story now had to have them be the main antagonist, a threat far smaller than the one Cortana was meant to be. Another faction is introduced later in the campaign known as Skimmers, an off-brand drone variant, and Sentinels make a return too, so we get some variety. But nothing would have been better than facing off against the Flood again. I would have sacrificed the open world if it meant having the Flood return. Just saying. But back on track, we are introduced to a new, other than the Skimmers, alien species known as the Zelenin, with one single individual, the Harbinger. She works to give us that biggest threat imaginable vibe that we lost from Cortana. The Zelenin are said to be worse than the Flood by the Forerunners. A heavy statement, especially because we never end up seeing why. The campaign ends with us stopping the threat before it comes. After defeating every local Spartan killer in the Banished, we take out the Harbinger, not seeming worse than the Flood, honestly. But that's not the end of the threat. Once we finish her off, it is revealed to us that the Banished leader Atriox, thought dead by no one, is actually alive, and he is seen awakening the Zelenin, so the story is far from over. The original campaigns had a lot more going for them story-wise. They had fun, adventure, fear, and stakes like you wouldn't believe. But as far as a 343 Halo game goes, this is my personal favorite. Infinite does an incredible job showing us Chief's strengths and shortcomings. It shows us his love for humanity through Fernando, and his fear to trust with the weapon. It even shows us a side to him we really only saw in Halo 3, with his respect and understanding to an enemy, Escharum. In Halo 2, in the very start of 3, Master Chief was ready to kill the Arbiter, was ready to fill the Arbiter with bullets. But in Halo 3, we see his understanding toward a fellow soldier, we see his respect and even kinship develop. And that form of storytelling is the main through line of Infinite's story. Relationships. Threats loom over every crest, but so does hope. Hope for a better tomorrow, hope for trust and respect for our fellow people, and understanding for even our enemies. That was my main takeaway from its story, and what I love the most about Halo Infinite. Oh, and its fucking grapple shot. Whee! Wow! Yippee! Okay, and that's gonna do it for this thought piece. Thank you guys so much for sitting through this and listening. I appreciate your time, wish you nothing but love in your life, and ask you to remember to keep on thinking. Until next time, wake me when you need me.